June 26, 1941. A bomber from a Soviet aviation regiment did not return from a combat sortie over a road west of Minsk. In the flight log, the aircraft was marked as destroyed after being hit by anti-aircraft fire. The crew was listed as lost. The location was recorded approximately, tied to a stretch of highway used by enemy motorized units. Several hours later, another entry appeared in a parallel report. A burning aircraft was observed descending toward a moving column of vehicles. An impact was seen near the roadway. Fires were reported among the vehicles. The observing crew returned to base and submitted a written statement describing flame, loss of altitude, and a direct trajectory toward the column. The two records were filed under the same date and mission number. No radio message was received from the damaged aircraft. No parachutes were observed. No landing attempt was recorded. The aircraft type was listed as capable of bailout under normal emergency procedures. In the casualty register, the pilot's name appeared with the note, "Did not return from combat flight." In a separate document prepared days later, the same name appeared again, now attached to an award citation. The wording described the aircraft being on fire and continuing toward the enemy vehicles. No recovery operation was logged at that time. No crash coordinates were fixed beyond general landmarks. The documentation stopped there. The aircraft had fuel remaining when it was hit. The crew knew the standard emergency procedures. The road was crowded. In the summer of 1941, the western military districts of the Soviet Union were operating under conditions defined by the rapid expansion of hostilities following the initiation of large-scale military operations along the western border. Air units stationed in Belarus and the western regions of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic were placed on continuous alert status. Orders, flight schedules, aircraft readiness reports, fuel and ammunition allocations, and personnel rosters were updated daily and often several times within a single operational period. Communications from frontline headquarters reflected a situation characterized by frequent air engagements, the movement of enemy mechanized columns along road networks, and repeated requests for aerial reconnaissance and strike missions against advancing ground formations. At airfields assigned to bomber aviation regiments, technical crews worked under compressed timelines to service aircraft returning from sorties and prepare them for subsequent flights. Documentation from these units recorded maintenance procedures conducted under field conditions, including engine inspections, fuel line checks, replacement of damaged control surfaces, rearming of bomb racks, and calibration of navigation instruments. Crews were briefed using operational maps marked with current intelligence data, including known enemy troop concentrations, armored movements, and air defense positions. Weather reports were compiled from local observations and regional meteorological stations, noting cloud cover, wind direction, visibility, and expected changes during daylight hours. The bomber aviation units operating in this sector were equipped primarily with twin-engine medium bombers designed for tactical strikes against ground targets. Aircraft logs detailed engine hours, previous combat damage, and modifications carried out in response to operational requirements. Armament configurations were standardized according to mission type, with high explosive and fragmentation bombs assigned for attacks on vehicle columns, fuel depots, and troop concentrations. Defensive armament included machine guns mounted in nose, dorsal, and ventral positions, with ammunition loads adjusted based on availability and anticipated resistance. Personnel records for flight crews listed pilots, navigators, bombardiers, radio operators, and gunners, along with their ranks, training history, and flight experience. Many crews had completed pre-war training programs and participated in large-scale exercises, while others had limited combat exposure prior to the current operations. Orders issued to these crews specified mission objectives, departure times, flight routes, altitudes, and return procedures. Emphasis was placed on coordination with other aviation units and ground forces, though communications were frequently disrupted by enemy action and technical limitations. On one such airfield, Captain Nikolai Gastello was assigned as the pilot of a bomber crew within his regiment. Official records listed his date and place of birth, party membership status, and prior service history. His training documentation indicated completion of flight school and assignment to bomber aviation prior to the outbreak of hostilities. Squadron rosters identified him as a crew commander responsible for aircraft operation, navigation coordination, and execution of assigned combat tasks. His crew composition was recorded in unit logs, including the names and roles of other airmen assigned to the aircraft. In the days following the start of hostilities, Gastello's unit conducted multiple sorties aimed at disrupting enemy advances along key transportation routes. After-action reports described flights conducted at low and medium altitudes under conditions of active enemy air defense. These reports included observations of anti-aircraft fire, sightings of enemy fighter aircraft, and the results of bombing runs as observed by crews during egress. Damage assessments were often limited to visual confirmation due to the rapid pace of operations and the lack of continuous reconnaissance coverage. Intelligence summaries compiled at the regimental and divisional levels indicated that enemy motorized and armored units were moving along major highways, supported by fuel trucks, artillery, and infantry transports. These columns were identified as priority targets for bomber aviation. Orders issued to bomber crews directed them to attack such concentrations when located, with the objective of hindering movement and causing material losses. Mission planning accounted for the likelihood of strong anti-aircraft resistance, particularly near road junctions and settlements. On the morning of a scheduled combat mission in late June 1941, Gastello's crew received briefing materials outlining the assigned target area. Maps showed a section of roadway reported to be used by enemy mechanized units. The briefing included information on estimated enemy strength, known air defense positions, and recommended approach vectors. Flight altitude and formation details were specified, along with radio frequencies to be used for communication within the flight group and with ground control. Technical personnel completed pre-flight checks according to standard procedures. Fuel tanks were filled to the required levels, bomb loads were secured, and engine tests were conducted on the runway. Ground crews documented these actions in aircraft service logs. Weather conditions at the time of departure were recorded as permitting flight, with visibility sufficient for navigation and target identification. The aircraft was cleared for takeoff along with others assigned to the same mission. The formation departed the airfield and proceeded along the designated route toward the target area. Navigational records indicated the use of visual landmarks supplemented by onboard instruments. Radio communication was maintained intermittently due to interference and operational constraints. As the aircraft approached the vicinity of the reported enemy column, crew members conducted visual scanning for ground targets and signs of air defense activity. According to subsequent reports compiled from surviving crews and ground observations, enemy anti-aircraft fire was encountered in the target area. Bursts were observed at varying altitudes, indicating the presence of light and medium-caliber guns. Gastello's aircraft was seen continuing its approach toward the roadway where enemy vehicles were located. Bomb release procedures were initiated in accordance with training and mission orders. During this phase of the engagement, Gastello's aircraft sustained damage consistent with anti-aircraft fire. Observations recorded by other aircrew noted that one of the engines was hit and subsequently ignited. Flames were visible along the engine nacelle, and smoke was observed trailing from the aircraft. Control of the aircraft appeared to be maintained despite the damage, with no immediate deviation from the flight path. Standard emergency procedures for engine fire were known to bomber crews and included actions such as shutting down the affected engine, engaging fire suppression systems if available, and attempting to stabilize the aircraft for return or forced landing. The specific actions taken within the cockpit of Gastello's aircraft at that moment were not recorded in detail, as no direct communication was received from the crew after the aircraft was hit. Observations from other aircraft were limited by distance, altitude, and the demands of ongoing combat. The aircraft continued to descend while maintaining forward motion toward the area occupied by enemy vehicles. Ground-based reports later described an aircraft descending with visible fire and impacting within the vicinity of a vehicle column. Explosions were observed at the point of impact, followed by fires among vehicles on the roadway. The time and location of the impact were noted in operational summaries compiled by nearby units. Enemy vehicle losses in the area were reported through various channels, including reconnaissance observations and intercepted communications. These reports indicated damage to multiple vehicles, though precise numbers varied between sources. The loss of Gastello's aircraft and crew was recorded in regimental casualty lists, with the time and approximate location noted based on available information. Following the mission, the regiment compiled standard loss reports documenting aircraft destroyed and personnel missing or killed in action. These reports were forwarded through the chain of command. Additional documentation included witness statements from other aircrew who had observed the damaged aircraft and its final trajectory. These statements focused on observable facts such as the presence of fire, altitude changes, and the point of impact. In the days that followed, information about the incident was disseminated through official channels. Summaries prepared for higher headquarters included a factual account of the mission, the loss of the aircraft, and reported enemy material losses in the target area. These documents adhered to the reporting conventions of the period, presenting events in chronological order and based on available observations. At the operational level, bomber units continued to receive and execute missions under similar conditions. Aircraft losses were frequent, and replacement crews and equipment were assigned as available. Training and briefing procedures remained consistent, with adjustments made in response to evolving enemy tactics and air defense measures. Records from this period reflect the continuous cycle of mission planning, execution, reporting, and reorganization within aviation units. The incident involving Gastello's aircraft was referenced in subsequent operational reports as part of the overall accounting of sorties and losses during the early phase of hostilities. These references did not include additional detail beyond what had been initially recorded. The focus of documentation remained on current operational requirements and the allocation of resources for ongoing missions. As summer operations continued, aviation units were redeployed as front lines shifted. Airfields were evacuated or relocated, and equipment was moved under time constraints. Personnel records were updated to reflect casualties, transfers, and new assignments. The loss of experienced crews was noted in training and readiness assessments, which documented the impact on unit capability. Throughout this period, official documentation maintained a standardized format and language, emphasizing factual reporting over narrative description. Events were recorded as they occurred, based on the information available at the time. The account of Gastello's final mission existed within this framework, as one of many recorded combat losses and engagements during the opening weeks of the war. The operational environment remained characterized by rapid changes, limited information, and the constant demand for aerial support of ground forces. Bomber aviation continued to operate against moving targets, often under heavy fire, with crews relying on training and immediate judgment to carry out assigned tasks. Records from this time preserve these actions as sequences of missions, engagements, and losses, without commentary beyond the requirements of military reporting. By the end of the reporting period covered in these documents, Gastello was listed among those who had not returned from combat sorties. His aircraft was recorded as destroyed during an attack on enemy ground forces. The documentation associated with this loss remained part of the archival record of the unit's activities during that phase of the war, reflecting the conditions, procedures, and events as they were recorded at the time. Operational reports compiled in early July 1941 continued to reflect the sustained tempo of air operations across the western sectors. Bomber aviation regiments were reassigned targets on a daily basis as intelligence regarding enemy movements was updated. Airfields previously used as primary bases were increasingly subjected to aerial attack, requiring dispersal of aircraft to auxiliary strips and the use of camouflaged parking areas. Engineering units prepared improvised runways and refueling points to maintain sortie rates. Documentation from these units recorded shortages of spare parts, delays in delivery of replacement aircraft, and the gradual reduction in experienced flight crews. Within this environment, the incident involving the loss of Captain Gastello's aircraft was incorporated into broader summaries of combat activity. These summaries were prepared at regimental, divisional, and front levels, each aggregating data from subordinate units. Loss tables listed aircraft destroyed, damaged, or missing, along with personnel casualties categorized as killed, wounded, or unaccounted for. The entry corresponding to Gastello's crew remained unchanged in successive reports, indicating no recovery of personnel or aircraft remains within the reporting period. Reconnaissance flights conducted over the area of the reported impact were limited by enemy air superiority and the rapid movement of ground forces. Aerial photographs obtained later showed sections of roadway with damaged and burned vehicles, though attribution to specific attacks was not conclusively established in contemporaneous documents. Ground intelligence reports from partisan detachments and retreating units mentioned destroyed equipment along certain routes, but these accounts were fragmentary and often lacked precise coordinates or timestamps. Higher command directives emphasized the need for continued pressure on enemy logistics and transport. Bomber units were instructed to prioritize attacks on fuel convoys, bridge crossings, and road junctions. Tactical instructions circulated among crews included guidance on approach angles to minimize exposure to anti-aircraft fire and recommendations for coordinated attacks by multiple aircraft to saturate defenses. These instructions were distributed in written form and reinforced during pre-flight briefings. Personnel replacement procedures were activated to address losses. Flight schools accelerated graduation schedules, and newly trained crews were assigned to operational units with minimal transition time. Records from these schools noted abbreviated training programs focused on basic aircraft handling, navigation, and bomb delivery. Advanced combat tactics were often conveyed directly at the unit level by surviving experienced personnel. The administrative handling of casualties followed established protocols. Notifications were prepared for families through military commissariats, based on information provided by unit headquarters. These notifications contained standardized language indicating that the serviceman had not returned from a combat mission and was presumed killed in action. In many cases, precise circumstances were not included due to the lack of detailed information. Within internal communications, references to specific incidents were generally limited to their operational relevance. The loss of Gastello's aircraft was cited in discussions of sortie outcomes for that day, alongside other losses and claimed enemy damage. No separate investigative commission was recorded as having been convened at that time, consistent with the high volume of combat losses and the focus on immediate operational needs. Press and information services operating under military oversight received summaries of frontline activities prepared by political and informational departments. These summaries were derived from operational reports and were intended for controlled dissemination. The selection of material for release followed directives aimed at maintaining morale and providing factual updates on the conduct of operations. Drafts of such summaries included brief mentions of airstrikes against enemy columns, without extensive detail. As the conflict progressed into July, the front line shifted eastward. Units that had operated from western airfields withdrew to new positions. Archival movement orders documented the relocation of regiments, including the transfer of surviving aircraft, equipment, and personnel. In these documents, losses sustained during earlier engagements were carried forward as cumulative figures. Technical assessments conducted during this period analyzed the effectiveness of aircraft against armored and motorized targets. Reports noted the vulnerability of bombers to concentrated anti-aircraft fire when operating at low altitude. Recommendations were made to adjust tactics, including changes in bomb release altitude and the use of escort fighters where available. Implementation of these recommendations varied depending on resource availability. The recording of individual acts during missions was generally limited to observable outcomes. In the case of Gastello's aircraft, the observable sequence, damage from fire, continued descent, impact in the target area, remained the basis of all official accounts. No additional first-hand testimony emerged to alter this sequence. Subsequent references repeated the same elements, indicating reliance on the initial observations. Operational diaries maintained by some units included brief daily entries summarizing weather, number of sorties, and notable incidents. An entry corresponding to the date of the mission listed multiple aircraft losses, including that of Gastello's crew, without elaboration. Such diaries served as working documents for commanders and staff rather than detailed narratives. Enemy reports captured later in the summer included references to air attacks on motorized columns during the same period. These reports mentioned losses to airstrikes but did not identify specific aircraft or crews. Correlation between these reports and Soviet records was attempted by intelligence sections, though exact matches were rarely established due to discrepancies in time and location reporting. As weeks passed, the administrative status of missing aircrew was reviewed according to regulations. In the absence of new information, missing personnel were reclassified as killed in action after a designated period. This process was documented in personnel files and reflected in updated casualty lists. Gastello's status was updated accordingly in regimental records. Training materials and tactical bulletins issued later in the summer included generalized descriptions of combat situations faced by bomber crews, including aircraft damaged by anti-aircraft fire and forced to make emergency decisions. These materials did not reference specific names or incidents but were based on aggregated combat experience reported by units. The archival trail related to Gastello's final mission consisted of mission orders, loss reports, witness statements from other crews, and subsequent administrative updates. Each document adhered to the formal language and structure prescribed by military regulations. No personal correspondence or unofficial accounts were included in the official file during this period. Within the regiment, command responsibilities were reassigned following losses among crew commanders. New appointments were recorded in orders of the day. These orders also listed commendations, disciplinary actions, and routine administrative matters. The absence of a crew commander due to combat loss was noted only insofar as it affected unit staffing. The broader operational situation continued to dominate reporting. Daily summaries from front headquarters focused on enemy advances, defensive actions by ground forces, and the availability of air support. Aviation losses were reported as aggregate numbers, with individual cases subsumed into totals. Throughout this phase, the language of documentation remained consistent, concise, factual, and oriented toward immediate military requirements. The narrative of events did not extend beyond what was observed and recorded at the time. The loss of Gastello's aircraft remained one entry among many in the ongoing record of air operations during the summer of 1941. By mid-July 1941, the accumulation of operational data from air units operating along the central and western axes required consolidation at higher command levels. Front Aviation Headquarters issued directives requesting clarification of reported enemy losses and verification of strike results where possible. These directives outlined procedures for cross-checking pilot observations with reconnaissance reports and ground force communications. In practice, such verification was constrained by the fluidity of the front line, the loss of observation posts, and limited availability of reconnaissance aircraft. In the sector where Gastello's regiment had operated, responsibility for record maintenance was transferred as units withdrew or were reorganized. Clerical personnel compiled and preserved flight logs, mission orders, and casualty lists during relocation. These records were packed and transported with unit headquarters. In several instances, incomplete documentation was reconstructed from surviving copies and staff recollections, with annotations indicating uncertainty where original materials were unavailable. The air regiment to which Gastello had been assigned received replacement aircraft and crews during this period. Delivery records noted the arrival of bombers from rear area depots, often with discrepancies between planned and actual quantities due to losses in transit and production delays. Replacement crews arrived with standardized documentation, including service records and training certificates. These crews were integrated into existing squadrons according to staffing tables approved by higher command. Operational planning documents from late July continued to list the same categories of missions, interdiction of enemy transport, attacks on troop concentrations, and strikes against temporary crossings and supply points. Briefing materials included updated maps reflecting enemy advances and the relocation of friendly ground forces. Air crew were instructed to report any significant observations during missions, including concentrations of vehicles, changes in enemy air defense patterns, and signs of fuel shortages or logistical congestion. The procedures for recording combat losses remained unchanged. Aircraft failing to return were listed as missing, with subsequent reclassification based on elapsed time and available information. The documentation for Gastello's crew progressed through these stages without amendment. Personnel files contained the standardized sequence of entries: date of mission, failure to return, witness observations, and eventual administrative determination. Political departments attached to aviation units compiled reports parallel to operational summaries. These reports focused on personnel status, discipline, and adherence to orders. References to combat incidents were factual and aligned with operational data. In these documents, the loss of aircraft and crews was treated as part of overall unit condition, affecting readiness and morale assessments. No separate analytical commentary was included beyond numerical accounting. In rear area administrative centers, archives received copies of operational reports from frontline units. These archives organized materials by unit designation and date. The filing of Gastello's mission records followed standard practice, with no special categorization beyond the unit and operational period. Archivists logged the receipt of documents and noted any missing attachments or inconsistencies. Simultaneously, information departments prepared bulletins summarizing air operations for distribution through approved channels. These bulletins drew on aggregated data and described airstrikes conducted against enemy forces. Individual aircraft losses were generally not enumerated in detail. When specific incidents were mentioned, descriptions adhered to the language of operational reports, emphasizing location, aim, and observable outcomes. Enemy activity during this phase included continued advancement along major transportation routes and the establishment of temporary airfields closer to the front. Intelligence summaries noted increased enemy fighter patrols and improved coordination of anti-aircraft defenses around key logistical nodes. These summaries informed adjustments in Soviet bomber tactics, including altered approach routes and timing. Technical evaluations conducted by aviation engineers examined damage patterns on aircraft returning from missions. Reports identified common causes of engine fires, structural failures, and control system damage. Recommendations included reinforcement of fuel lines, improved fire suppression measures, and changes in armor placement where feasible. Implementation depended on industrial capacity and the availability of materials. The documentation of these evaluations referenced multiple combat incidents without naming individual crews. Gastello's aircraft was not singled out in technical analyses, as no physical examination of the wreckage was possible. The loss was categorized under engine fire resulting from anti-aircraft damage, consistent with other recorded cases. As August approached, the scale of operations expanded further east. Aviation units were redeployed to support defensive actions along new lines. Movement orders specified routes, staging points, and timelines for relocation. During these moves, administrative sections reviewed personnel rosters to ensure accuracy. Casualty figures were updated to reflect confirmed losses. In these updated rosters, Gastello's name appeared among those listed as killed in action, with the date and general location recorded. No additional descriptive text was added. The entry mirrored others in format and content. Copies of these rosters were forwarded to higher headquarters and relevant administrative bodies. Correspondence between Front Headquarters and Central Command included periodic summaries of aviation effectiveness. These summaries relied on statistical aggregates: sorties flown, tonnage of bombs dropped, aircraft lost. Individual actions were subsumed into these figures. The emphasis remained on current operational capacity rather than detailed reconstruction of past engagements. The ongoing compilation of wartime chronicles by military historians attached to the armed forces began during this period. These chronicles were based on daily reports and orders. Draft entries covering late June and early July included references to air operations against enemy columns. The language used was derived directly from operational summaries. Gastello's mission was included only insofar as it contributed to the recorded number of sorties and losses for that day. Training units continued to incorporate lessons from ongoing combat into instructional materials. Manuals and bulletins described scenarios involving aircraft damage and emergency situations. These descriptions were generalized and anonymized. They reflected patterns observed across multiple incidents rather than specific cases. Within the regiment, personal effects of fallen crew members were inventoried and forwarded according to regulations. Property logs listed items recovered from quarters or aircraft maintenance areas. These items were packaged and sent to designated collection points. Correspondence regarding these procedures followed standardized formats. As administrative processes continued, inquiries from families began to reach military commissariats. Responses were prepared based on the information available in central records. These responses reiterated the official status recorded in personnel files. No additional details were provided beyond what had been confirmed through operational reporting. The cumulative record of air operations for the summer of 1941 grew in volume. Files expanded to include thousands of pages of reports, orders, and logs. Within this mass of documentation, the record of Gastello's final mission remained static, unchanged by new information. It existed as a fixed entry within the broader sequence of recorded events. Enemy countermeasures evolved concurrently. Reports noted the increased deployment of mobile anti-aircraft units accompanying vehicle columns. This development influenced mission planning, with bomber crews instructed to vary attack profiles and coordinate with fighter escorts when possible. These tactical adjustments were documented in updated operational instructions. Despite these adjustments, aircraft losses continued. Daily loss reports listed multiple crews failing to return. The administrative handling of each case followed the same process applied to Gastello's crew. The uniformity of this process was reflected in the consistent structure of documentation. By late August, the intensity of operations showed no reduction. Airfields further east became active, and new logistical challenges emerged. Fuel shortages, maintenance backlogs, and personnel fatigue were noted in internal assessments. These assessments focused on sustaining operational output rather than retrospective analysis. Throughout this period, the narrative preserved in official records adhered to the immediacy of events as they unfolded. Each document captured a moment within the ongoing conflict, bounded by the information available at that time. The account of Gastello's mission remained one such moment, recorded and filed without elaboration beyond observed and reported facts. During July 1941, the administrative and reporting chain for aviation units on the Western Front continued to function under conditions of frequent relocation and disrupted communications. Regimental headquarters maintained duplicate sets of flight documentation when possible. Mission orders were recorded in daily logs with serial numbers, dates, and signatures. After-action reports were written in standardized formats, indicating time of takeoff, time of arrival in target area, altitude, bomb type and quantity, observed enemy disposition, anti-aircraft fire intensity, observed fighter presence, and the condition of the aircraft on return. Where aircraft did not return, the log entry was closed with the notation of non-return and the status of the crew recorded as missing pending clarification. In the file relating to the sortie on June 26, 1941, the loss of Captain N.F. Gastello's aircraft remained attached to the mission report package prepared by the regiment. The package contained the original mission tasking and the list of aircraft assigned, with the designation of the lead and wingman aircraft. It included the flight group's planned route and target area description, with reference to the road segment in the Molodechno-Radoshkovichi direction where enemy motorized units had been reported. Attached to the package were witness statements from the crew of the accompanying aircraft that returned to base, describing the moment when Gastello's bomber was struck by anti-aircraft fire, the subsequent fire on the aircraft, and the descent toward the enemy road column. The statements were recorded as observations of external phenomena, visible flame and smoke, loss of altitude, maintenance of forward motion, and impact near the roadway occupied by vehicles. The reporting procedure required that a unit commander submit a concise summary to the next level of command. This summary listed the number of aircraft dispatched, the number returned, and the declared cause of loss were known. For Gastello's aircraft, the cause was recorded as being hit by anti-aircraft fire in the target area, with the aircraft subsequently burning and failing to return. The summary also included a notation of reported enemy losses in the impact area, described in terms of vehicles destroyed or set on fire. The language remained limited to what could be stated from observation and the immediate aftermath as reported by aircrew. Front Aviation Headquarters received such summaries from multiple units and compiled consolidated reports. These reports were formatted as tables with appended narrative notes. They were transmitted by available communications channels, including courier delivery where radio transmission was not reliable. Staff sections responsible for operations, intelligence, and personnel each retained copies for their own registers. In the personnel section, the primary requirement was the accurate listing of killed and missing aircrew for replacement planning, notification preparation, and maintenance of service records. At the same time, political departments attached to the aviation units maintained separate files containing short factual notes on exemplary execution of combat tasks. These notes were drawn from operational reporting and witness statements. The intended use was for unit-level briefings, wall newspapers, and controlled transmission to authorized information organs. These materials were prepared in the same time frame as the operational reports and relied on the same limited pool of observations. The language used in these notes remained formal and declarative, identifying the unit, the date, the mission type, and the observable outcome. In the second half of July, higher command processes related to decorations and awards continued alongside operational reporting. Units submitted recommendations for awards in standardized forms, including the candidate's personal data, rank, position, unit designation, and a brief description of the action for which an award was proposed. These submissions were reviewed at successive levels of command, each adding endorsements or revisions. The forms were forwarded with supporting documents, including mission reports and witness statements were available. A recommendation package for Captain Gastello was prepared and transmitted through this channel. The package described the circumstances of the June 26 sortie in the same terms as the unit's operational reports: a combat flight against an enemy motorized column, the aircraft being hit by anti-aircraft fire, the aircraft catching fire, and the subsequent impact in the vicinity of the enemy vehicles. The supporting witness statement from the accompanying crew was cited as the basis for the description. The package included confirmation that the aircraft had not returned and that the crew was lost. In accordance with the award procedure, the recommendation identified the candidate's service record, prior missions, and position as a crew commander in bomber aviation. Parallel to this, administrative lists of casualties were updated to include the names of all members of the lost crew. These lists were compiled according to unit staffing documents, which identified each crew member by name, rank, and duty position. The crew roster for Gastello's aircraft was entered into the casualty register. In units where documentation permitted, each name was accompanied by the date of the mission and the note, "Did not return from combat flight, pending formal reclassification." Copies of these registers were transmitted to rear administrative organs responsible for personnel accounting and family notifications. Within the operational environment of July 1941, the term "fire turun" appeared in internal and information department materials as a descriptive label for a sequence of events involving a burning aircraft and a directed impact on a ground target. The use of the term was not accompanied by extended explanation in these documents. In most cases it was used as a short descriptor after a factual narrative: aircraft struck, aircraft on fire, aircraft directed toward enemy concentration, impact and explosion. The appearance of this term in typed summaries reflected the practice of standardizing concise phrases for repeated situations reported by multiple units. Aviation units continued to face enemy anti-aircraft defenses concentrated along main roads, crossings, and within the vicinity of moving columns. Operational instructions circulated to crews emphasized the requirement to identify the target quickly, execute bomb release on the first pass when possible, and avoid prolonged exposure to concentrated fire. These instructions also included guidance on flight formation spacing, altitude selection based on cloud cover and visibility, and the use of terrain masking where feasible. Reports from crews returning from missions frequently noted the difficulty of approach against columns accompanied by light anti-aircraft weapons firing from vehicles or roadside positions. In the area of Molodechno and adjacent road networks, ground combat conditions changed rapidly as front lines moved and rear elements withdrew. The possibility of immediate on-site confirmation of an aircraft crash location depended on the presence of friendly ground forces and the ability of reconnaissance elements to reach the area. In the case of Gastello's aircraft, the original reporting did not include a recovery operation in the immediate days following the loss. The crash site was described by reference to known villages and road segments rather than precise coordinates. Subsequent operational documents repeated the same general location references, indicating that no new positional data had been added in the reporting chain. In late July 1941, a decree awarding Captain Gastello the title of Hero of the Soviet Union was issued and communicated through official channels. The transmission of the decree was recorded in unit orders, with the date and the citation included in the standard phrasing of award notifications. Regimental and divisional headquarters received the information and entered it into unit records. Administrative sections updated personal files to include the award entry. Political departments prepared short factual notices consistent with the decree's wording for dissemination within authorized frameworks. The award documentation listed Captain Gastello by name and rank and stated the basis for the award as the execution of a combat mission under conditions resulting in the loss of the aircraft and crew, with the aircraft directed into an enemy concentration after being set on fire by anti-aircraft fire. In unit records, the decree was copied into the daily order register and read to personnel in a formal setting according to established practice. The reading procedure was logged, indicating the date, the assembled personnel, and the officer responsible for the announcement. In the same period, the recording of other crew members' status remained within the casualty and award accounting system. Unit records continued to list the other members of Gastello's crew as killed in action or missing, depending on the administrative stage of classification. Where awards were issued to other crew members, those entries were made in their files according to the same procedure. The relative ranking of awards did not alter the operational record of the mission, which remained the primary source for mission circumstances. Press materials derived from military information summaries included brief accounts of air attacks against enemy columns. These materials identified certain incidents by naming the unit or the individual airman, depending on the authorization level for publication. The description of Gastello's action was presented in compressed form consistent with the prevailing style: a bomber struck by anti-aircraft fire, the aircraft burning, and the aircraft directed into a concentration of enemy vehicles. The language used in these publications retained the declarative tone of official summaries and avoided technical detail beyond what was necessary to describe the sequence. Within operational units, the circulation of such information served a practical function in briefings and instruction. Flight commanders used recent mission accounts to reinforce attention to anti-aircraft threat indicators and emergency procedures. Technical officers referenced cases of aircraft fires when instructing crews on pre-flight checks of fuel systems and the operation of fire suppression equipment. These discussions were conducted within the unit framework and reflected an immediate focus on operational readiness. In August 1941, the continuing movement of front lines led to further displacement of air units. Regiments were relocated to airfields deeper in the rear, sometimes operating from temporary strips. Orders for relocation included inventories of aircraft, engines, weapons, and support vehicles. The movement orders also listed the condition of unit documentation and specified which files were to be carried by courier and which could be left in secure storage. Personnel accounting sections ensured that award decrees and casualty registers were included among priority documents. As regiments resettled at new bases, they resumed sorties under revised operational taskings. Targets shifted to reflect enemy advances toward new objectives. Bomber missions were conducted against bridges, road junctions, rail sidings, and troop concentrations. The frequency of missions required repeated cycles of aircraft servicing, crew briefing, sortie execution, and reporting. Losses continued. The process for recording non-returning aircraft remained standardized, and the use of witness statements from returning crews remained the primary method for describing the last observed actions of lost aircraft. Within higher command staff work, the classification of certain actions under standardized terms continued. In personnel and political reports, short descriptors were used for rapid reference. The term fire turn was applied where the reporting indicated that a burning aircraft impacted directly into an enemy target area rather than attempting a landing or bailout. The inclusion of such a term did not add detail to the underlying mission report, it functioned as an indexing phrase in some compilations. In the rear administrative system, award records were centralized. The entries for new heroes of the Soviet Union were recorded in central registers with the decree date and the unit identification. These registers were maintained alongside casualty records. The receipt of award notifications triggered additional administrative actions, including preparation of certificates for families and updates to service histories. The documents involved in these actions were produced in standardized formats and carried official seals and signatures. At unit level, personal files were maintained in a condition affected by frequent movement and the loss of staff. Where files were incomplete, clerks reconstructed entries from copies of orders and summaries. The entry for Gastello's award was included in the unit's order register, and where his personal file existed in the unit archive, the award was noted with the decree date. The casualty status in the file remained recorded as killed in action based on the original mission loss report and subsequent administrative classification. In operational reporting for late summer 1941, the account of the June 26 mission was not expanded. It continued to appear as a completed entry, aircraft dispatched, aircraft lost, CAS recorded as anti-aircraft fire, impact observed near an enemy vehicle concentration. The absence of additional detail reflected the constraints on investigation and site access under combat conditions. The mission remained in the record as one of many early war sorties against moving columns. As autumn approached, some units prepared retrospective internal compilations of combat episodes for instructional and informational use within the armed forces. These compilations were assembled from existing mission reports, award citations, and witness statements. The entries were arranged by date and unit. The account of Gastello's mission was reproduced in essentially the same wording found in the award recommendation and the original witness statement summary. The compilation process involved copying existing text rather than generating new descriptive material. The continued employment of bomber aviation against road traffic intensified the exposure of aircraft to mobile anti-aircraft weapons. Reports from crews noted that enemy columns frequently dispersed when aircraft were sighted, with vehicles moving off the road into fields or tree lines. Bombardiers adjusted aim points based on these movements. When columns included fuel trucks, secondary fires were observed after explosions, though confirmation remained limited to crew observation during egress. Such observations were recorded in after-action reports in short statements describing smoke, flame, and the presence of burning vehicles. In the system of wartime record-keeping, the material related to Gastello's mission existed primarily as a set of linked documents: the mission order, the sortie log entry, the witness statement from the accompanying aircraft, the loss report, and the award decree entry. Each was maintained in its respective register. The information content remained consistent across copies. The sequence described by these documents remained the same through the summer and into the subsequent reporting cycles, without the addition of new operational data. By the end of the summer reporting period, aviation units continued to operate under constant tasking with limited resources. Staff sections continued to file and transmit documents according to regulations, with priority given to operational readiness and immediate reporting requirements. In this flow of documentation, the record of the June 26, 1941 incident remained fixed in the language of the time, preserved as an entry in the ongoing accounting of sorties, losses, and formally recorded actions. In September 1941, Aviation Headquarters continued to issue operational directives under the same system of written orders, radio messages, and courier dispatches. Bomber regiments operating on the central approaches received mission taskings focused on road and rail traffic, river crossings, and concentrations of vehicles identified by reconnaissance and ground reports. Target lists were revised frequently. The format of these lists remained consistent. Grid references were available, named settlements, estimated enemy composition, and the time window in which movement was expected. Staff sections appended notes regarding the presence of enemy fighters and the likelihood of mobile anti-aircraft weapons in the target area. Within units that had withdrawn from the western airfields, the administrative burden expanded as replacements arrived and organizations were rebuilt. Daily orders continued to record assignments, removals from strength, and the accounting of losses. Where personal files of fallen personnel had been separated from regimental archives during relocations, duplicate entries were made in unit registers to preserve the basic data required for personnel accounting. Clerks maintained lists of those killed in action, including those whose status had been finalized after the lapse of the prescribed period following a non-returning sortie. In the register containing the name of Captain N.F. Gastello, the award decree entry remained paired with the casualty entry. The file notation included the date of the combat mission and the administrative classification. The award entry was recorded in the same manner as other decrees received at unit level: decree date, award title, and the brief official citation text in standardized form. There was no separate operational amendment attached to the loss report beyond the award citation. The earlier witness statement remained the primary descriptive attachment. Information sections continued to prepare short factual notices based on operational and award documentation. These notices were distributed within units through briefings and postings where permitted. The content repeated the recorded sequence: combat mission against an enemy motorized column, aircraft struck by anti-aircraft fire, aircraft on fire, aircraft directed toward the column, impact and explosion in the target area. The notices did not include additional coordinates or post-impact inspection results. They were treated as derived summaries rather than primary documentation. During October 1941, the maintenance of aviation archives became more formalized in rear areas as units stabilized at new airfields. Commanders designated responsible officers for the custody of mission logs, casualty registers, and award orders. Storage procedures were adjusted to minimize loss during potential further relocations. Documents were placed in sealed folders with inventories, and duplicate copies were prepared where typewriters, paper, and carbon sheets were available. In this work, emphasis was placed on preserving the minimum required elements: dates, unit designations, names, and serial identifiers. The ongoing series of operational summaries prepared by Front Headquarters continued to include aggregate figures. In these summaries, the listing of heroes of the Soviet Union awarded to aviation personnel appeared as a short appendix. Names were presented with rank and unit. Captain Gastello's name appeared in these appendices in the same standardized format as others. The inclusion was administrative and informational, reflecting receipt of the decree and entry into the register. At the same time, aviation training and replacement programs continued to feed crews to the front. Training centers produced bulletins describing observed enemy tactics, including the coordination between motorized columns and mobile anti-aircraft fire. These bulletins described the typical pattern: vehicles dispersing from roads when aircraft appeared, anti-aircraft weapons firing from roadside positions, and the appearance of smoke screens in some sectors. Recommendations addressed approach altitude, timing, and the need for prompt bomb release. These bulletins were distributed through command channels and entered unit instructional files. Within operational regiments, flight commanders maintained brief notes on mission patterns and losses. These notes were used in immediate pre-flight briefings and did not constitute formal archival material. Where such notes referenced specific incidents, they did so in the same limited descriptive manner. The case of a burning aircraft descending into a target area was cited as a reported occurrence, with emphasis on recognizing fire damage and understanding emergency procedures. No additional detail was provided beyond what had been recorded in the formal witness statements and award documentation. As winter conditions developed, changes in weather affected air operations. Meteorological reports recorded reduced daylight hours, lower cloud ceilings, snow cover, and frequent fog in certain regions. These conditions influenced navigation and target identification. Mission orders included alternate targets and return routes accounting for weather changes. Technical crews recorded increased difficulties in engine starting, fuel viscosity issues, and the requirement for additional ground time for pre-flight preparations. These technical reports were filed alongside routine maintenance logs. In December 1941, the central administrative organs responsible for awards and casualties continued to process records from the fronts. Central registers listed award recipients and maintained the corresponding decree numbers and dates. In parallel, casualty accounting offices processed lists of those killed in action, including those confirmed by administrative determination where remains were not recovered. Family notification processes continued according to regulation, using standardized forms and the information available from unit records. In cases where an award decree had been issued posthumously, the notification package included the fact of the award as recorded in the decree. In the same period, some front units compiled internal sheets listing those awarded and those lost, intended for unit record-keeping and for forwarding to higher headquarters. These sheets were typically arranged by squadron or by date. Captain Gastello's entry on such sheets repeated the established data elements: name, rank, position, date of mission, award title. The associated descriptive text remained limited to the content of the citation and the original witness account. No field investigation report was appended in the sheets available at that time. In early 1942, as the administrative system stabilized further behind the front, requests for clarification regarding certain loss incidents were issued by personnel sections in cases where discrepancies appeared in names, ranks, or unit designations. These requests were transmitted to regimental headquarters for confirmation. Responses were prepared by checking the unit's daily orders, sortie logs, and casualty registers. Where discrepancies were found, corrected entries were issued as amendments to prior lists. In the entries associated with Gastello, the principal administrative elements remained consistent, and no correction was indicated in the available registers. During 1942, air operations continued on multiple fronts. The documentation system expanded accordingly. Archives accumulated mission logs, intelligence summaries, and technical reports. Within these materials, the June 26, 1941 sortie remained a fixed record associated with the early phase of operations. It was occasionally referenced in compiled lists of award decrees and in instructional notes derived from award citations. The wording remained consistent across copies due to reliance on the decree text and the original witness statement summary. In the rear, some institutions responsible for preserving wartime records prepared interim compilations of award citations and brief descriptions of actions for internal use. These compilations were arranged alphabetically or by unit. The entry for Captain Gastello included his rank, unit assignment as recorded in the decree, the date of the mission, and the citation wording describing the burning aircraft and the directed impact into the enemy vehicle concentration. The compilation did not include additional operational context beyond the elements present in the decree. In areas where fighting had shifted, local administrative bodies and military authorities sometimes received reports from civilians or local officials regarding aircraft wreckage in fields or near roads. Such reports were generally routed through military commandants and local NKVD offices to relevant military authorities. The handling of these reports depended on security conditions and the proximity of front lines. Where wreckage was accessible, local authorities sometimes recorded basic details, approximate location, visible markings if any, and the condition of remains and equipment. These local records were not uniformly transmitted to aviation regiments due to the complexity of the situation and the number of incidents. Where any such local report referenced an aircraft crash near a road column engagement in the Molodechno area, it was handled within the constraints of available communications and authority. The general practice was to transmit any potentially identifying information to the nearest military headquarters. In many cases, identifying information could not be confirmed on site due to damage, fire, and scavenging. Where no definitive identification was possible, the report was filed as an unconfirmed crash site note, separate from the unit's established casualty determination. Within regiments, the maintenance of memory boards and lists of fallen personnel was conducted according to directives issued by political departments. These lists were compiled from casualty registers and were displayed in unit spaces where permitted. The entries were factual: name, rank, position, date of death or date of non-returning sortie. Captain Gastello's name appeared on such lists when compiled, accompanied by his rank and the date of the June 26 mission, and where space allowed, the award title as recorded in the decree. During 1943, the continuation of award processing produced further compilations and updated registers. Institutional staff responsible for maintaining the Central Award Archive confirmed that earlier decrees remained valid and that entries were properly recorded. Units received periodic circulars instructing them to maintain accurate files and to forward missing documentation where possible. These circulars specified that duplicate copies of decrees, citations, and casualty lists should be kept in separate locations to reduce loss. At the operational level, bomber regiments continued to record sorties in the same structured manner. The format of after-action reports and loss statements remained consistent, with some expansions in detail where staff capacity allowed. Reconnaissance support improved in some sectors, allowing more frequent photographic confirmation of strike areas. Even with this improvement, confirmation of early war incidents remained limited by the passage of time, the movement of front lines, and the absence of preserved physical evidence from the original crash sites under controlled conditions. In administrative correspondence, the term used for the described method of impact by a burning aircraft remained present as a short descriptor in some documents. Its use remained tied to the sequence of observed events and the phrasing of citations. It appeared as a labeling term in compiled lists and instructional summaries. The presence of this label did not alter the primary record of the mission, it served as an indexing reference in some sets of paperwork. In 1944, as front lines moved westward again, military authorities regained access to areas previously held by the enemy. In these areas, military commandants and local administrations undertook tasks including clearance of battlefield debris and the organization of burials where remains were present. Reports from these activities were compiled by local military authorities and, where possible, forwarded to relevant commands. The identification of aircrew remains and aircraft wreckage depended on the condition of the site and the presence of identifying items, including personal documents, serial plates, and unit markings. Where a crash site corresponded to a previously recorded loss, local authorities could attempt to match the location and circumstances to unit records. This process required coordination between local military offices and aviation personnel sections, which used casualty registers to identify likely matches. If an identification was made, an administrative note could be added to the personnel file indicating the recovery or confirmation of remains and the location of burial. Where identification was not confirmed, the existing administrative classification remained unchanged. In the paperwork related to Captain Gastello, the primary established record continued to be the original non-returning sortie loss report and the award decree entry. Any later local reports would have required conclusive identification to alter the file. Where no conclusive identification was documented in the unit-level records accessible in the reporting chain, the file remained as originally classified, with the loss recorded at the time of the mission. In units still operating, the formal reading of decrees and the maintenance of award lists continued under wartime procedures. Where personnel were rotated or transferred, their service records carried entries of awards and unit assignments. The central registers ensured continuity of these records. For fallen personnel, the award entries remained part of the administrative file, used for family documentation and for internal record-keeping. By 1945, the volume of wartime documentation required structured archival transfer. Orders were issued directing units to prepare final inventories of operational logs, casualty registers, and award orders for handover to archival repositories. This involved sorting documents by date and type, verifying that required signatures and seals were present, and creating index lists. Units with incomplete files noted missing materials in the inventory, indicating loss during relocation or destruction during enemy air attacks. In the transfer process, the set of documents associated with the June 26, 1941 mission was preserved in the form in which it had existed through the war: the mission assignment list, the sortie log entry indicating non-return, the witness statement summary from the accompanying crew, the loss report, and the award decree entry in the unit order register and central award register. Where duplicates existed, they were filed under the same classification. The text remained consistent across copies due to reliance on contemporaneous documentation. During the final months of wartime operations, and immediately following cessation of hostilities in Europe, administrative bodies continued to process outstanding personnel matters, including the consolidation of casualty records and the finalization of family notifications. Units submitted final casualty totals and lists of those killed in action. These lists were reconciled against central registers. In cases where missing personnel had remained unconfirmed, the wartime administrative determinations were carried into the final registers unless new confirming data was received. In the documentation environment of that time, the record of Captain Gastello's final sortie remained defined by the contemporaneous chain of reports and the award decree issued in 1941. The preserved file described the combat tasking, the aircraft being hit by anti-aircraft fire, the ignition of the aircraft, the observed descent toward a column of enemy vehicles, and the impact within that concentration. The file did not include additional operational observations beyond those recorded by the accompanying crew and the standardized language of the award documentation. The entry remained within the broader set of aviation records compiled and filed according to the regulations in force during the war, maintained as a set of factual statements tied to the date and the mission as reported at the time.